Well, hello, University of Maryland, and hello, Zoom. First off, so I'm Tim Misner, so I am Charles W. Misner's third son. He has 4 children. My sister Benedicta is here, and you heard from her earlier. It was delightful to hear her views and the paper views being corresponding quite well together. And there's 2 other brothers. My brother Francis Misner, who you'll see later today. He'll come by, I'm sure, in maybe an hour or so. And then my brother Christopher Misner, the youngest son, and who couldn't be here today, but certainly sends his regards. And actually, the main thing I want to say, so the view here of a son as opposed to a physics student is it's really it's really delightful to see everyone gathered together with the excitement of physics. Here, I'm pretty sure we have undergraduates, graduate students, people who've moved on from physics to other endeavors, but still maintain their interest, faculty, visiting faculty. It's just the crowd here and the energy is just wonderful. And I can see the delight my father took in being in a setting such as this, and it's bittersweet not to have him here with you today because he would have enjoyed it so much. The view here, it's a good discovery for us too, or for me too, because as children, our view of the University of Maryland Physics Department is a little narrower than what we're experiencing here today. So for us in the time, and maybe Dieter, you'll have your own memories of that. It's like getting stuck in the parking lot as the loading truck for whatever that gas tank is being refilled, or my dad saying he needs to do something in the office and just needs a couple of minutes, which would turn into an hour. So we're wandering that top floor hallway, trying to stare into his office window or jump up to it. And, Copernicus there was blocking our ability. That ratty Copernicus drawing was blocking our ability to see. And so the magic of it here is really apparent. So I want to thank Peter and Ted. Thank you so much for organizing and bringing us here today. And thanks to the Department of Physics for making this possible.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I want to say that actually in the academic community, it's also like a family. And imagine if we really go to our office from 9 to 5, you're spending more time with your colleagues than with your family members, and deservingly being complained about, right? And so Charlie, as I said, I joined the faculty here in the General Relativity Theory group in 1980. I can imagine that's already, 40-something years. And usually the head of a research group, pretty much his or her personality kind of determines what each member of the group would follow, and certainly the dynamics in the group. And I would comment on both sides, that is the academic side as well as the personal side. Charlie is such a humble person, loving, caring person, a colleague. And I feel that we're so lucky to have a leader, a kind of father figure like that, because if you look around, there are other people who are leading a big team that's very aggressive, telling you what to do, and look at impact factors and all those extraneous things, just instead of the intellectual, the demand on the intellectual side with caring. Okay, so that's one overriding thing that I feel, at least I feel very lucky to be at Maryland with the General Relativity Theory group led by Charlie Misner, and certainly before him, Joe Weber with the gravitational experimental group, many eminent physicists, colleagues, and represented by Peter. I'm so happy to be in this bigger family. Now, intellectually, I would also say, let me just retrace back a little bit of my own development. I joined I entered Princeton in 1967. And after, in May, I remember, the grueling general exam, they call it, 5 days, 4 days, morning, afternoon, 12 subjects, no nonsense. Even if you want to do condensed matter physics, they call it solid state physics, you have to know general relativity. And then Friday, there's a whole morning of oral exam. So after catching a breath, that's time to look for a thesis advisor. And I just gingerly knock on the door of John Wheeler, okay? It's a room with a big table, stacks of papers and so on. He said, oh, all right, you want to do general relativity. And then he reached in the back, that's a stack of PRL, Physical Review Letters. And this is the most recent issue, 1969, May of 1969. Ted would know. You've read Charlie's papers. That's the mixed master universe. And then he said, read it and perturb it. So I had the same fate as Saul. And so that started my sort of career. And why do I want to point that out? Because most of the others, my fellow students, Wheeler gave them each a topic in black hole with the hope that maybe at the end there's a book published, okay? I even remember distinctly who was given what topic. Like Jim Hartle, he wasn't a PhD student, but he was supposed to prove the neutrino, the weak interacting particles and non-conservation, and then baryon conservation. I think that was Jacob Becken's time. And so one by one, okay? So in a way, even from the beginning, I have already joined Charlie Misner's group, okay? I have to read Charlie's paper, May 1969, look up that issue. That's Mixed Master Universe, right? And before that, 67, the isotropy of the universe, and then 68, the Misner-Matzner paper of the viscosity due to neutrino viscosity. And that certainly, was a precursor to what I did with particle production in the early universe, back reaction with the same purpose, which is the isotropization of the early universe. Now, so in a way, I was doing things closer to what many people in the Maryland group at that time, the late 60s, early 70s. And I still remember struggling with the Lie group, Lie algebra and all that. I know it's a little bit easier than the problem that Saul had to tackle. Well, even though you have the Carter killing tensor. This is just a little thing. I was staying in Jagwin. That was the time that we moved already from Palmer Physical Lab to the new building, and each student has a little carol over there. I was sort of knocking my head about the Lie group, Lie algebra, and all that. And for many days, I said, well, look, I don't understand this. Why don't I try to get some help, maybe directly from Charlie? And I was so embarrassed that was a Saturday evening. And I had I summoned up my courage and gathered enough quarters with the payphone, okay, right outside there. And when I started dropping the quarters in, it rang for a long time. And then when Charlie picked up the phone, it turned out to be a party going on. There are lots of people. Oh, I said, I'm sorry, Professor Misner, sorry for disturbing you, and I hung up, okay? So, it's not Charlie's fault, of course. I mean, And of course, after I joined the faculty member here, I had many chances to be invited to his home, but we never discussed physics. So it's that kind of thing that started me on the road, Mixed Master Universe, and then the BLK. And these days we call it the Belinsky, Lifshitz, Kalashnikov, Lifshitz, Misner universe, which is of course extremely important. So, and associated with it, the mini superspace that I think Steve said he's going to comment on. So that was a period wherein Charlie adopted what he developed with the ADM and applied it to quantum cosmology. I would say it's the second wave because earlier there was the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, and then there was Charlie Misner in the late 60s for, and then of course in the 80s there's a Hartle-Hawking wave function and so on and so forth. Now, there are lots of sort of stories about this, but I won't take up too much time, except I want to relate to you. 20 years ago, 1993, we had a big conference here in honor of both Dieter Brill, Professor Brill, and Charlie Misner's 60th birthday. And during the banquet, I remember what Dieter said, his first sentence, okay? And he said, at my age, I think Dieter was only 59 at that point, we combined the two. Gauss would have been dead for 20 years or something. Now, I look it up, Gauss actually lived till 78 or something, he was long living, okay? But it's actually, you can see Dieter is such a modest, humble person. I get it, what he meant is that maybe what Gauss did in his first 20 years is much better than what I'm doing now. At least I feel that way. If you look at what Charlie did in the 50s, which Ted gave a wonderful account, right? From 57 on and so on, they were tackling the most difficult issues, wormholes, for example, that would come back again and again, and then ADM and so on. So every time I read MTW, I was thinking, at what age were these three gentlemen, right, at that time? And matching with my own, I said, oh, forget it, okay? There's just no way that I could compare with, they not only have the foresight, right? It's the whole scope, right? The future direction, they already sort of know where it's taking, and also adding on their insight to it. So when you say a genius, right, it's just one word. But when you lay it out and look at what's happening in front of you, back and forth, there's just no comparison. In fact, let me end this with the opening remark of John Wheeler in honor of Charlie Misner during the banquet. I don't know whether you guys remember that. He said, Charlie Misner, I wish there are more Charlie Misner. One is not enough. 2, 3, I wish there are more Charlie Misner. Okay, I remember all these things. And I feel the same way. We are so lucky to have Charlie as intellectual, professional at that level, as a leader, as well as on the personal level, as a friend, as a mentor. And I was just chatting with Salman, who himself is a director for a long time. I truly feel that if you think about people, right? I mean, that's in your memory bank. It's no longer a timeline, and there's no causal ordering per se. What happened 60 years or 40 years is just as freshly, vividly that you feel. And so with that, I never felt that Charlie has left us. Thank you.
Thank you, Baylock. It's a pleasure to be here, and I feel warm and fuzzy to be sharing these memories of Charlie. And I might add, they're not scientific memories, they're personal memories. Okay, so I arrived here from Cornell in 1972 to work with Joe Weber. And I was assigned as the grader for Charlie Misner. And that was the beginning of a long, long relationship. So in 1973, which I believe was the first year that MTW was in bound form, I was grader for him. I wrote the solutions for that class. Those were in the days of mimeographs. So I would write it out on the mimeograph pad, run it off on the mimeograph machine, and I believe I still have copies of those solutions. Yeah. During that time, I was talking to Charlie. I told him that I wanted to set up an amateur radio station. I was an amateur radio guy. And he says, hey, well, why don't you do it at my house? So he took me to his house, and climbing up trees in the backyards, I set up an antenna, I set up the radio station, and I got to meet his wonderful family. Susanna was just delightful, and the kids were great. I should say they're about 10 years younger than I am, so they were early teens and ish back then. And it was absolutely delightful to have them around when I was on the radio station, which was about once a week. And Francis, who I understand will be here later, he was at my side every time I was there. It was a truly heartwarming experience. And I should add that Charlie was my first and by far my best mentor in my entire life. So I set up the radio station, and I got known as the ham radio guy. So whenever they saw me later, hey, there's the ham radio guy. That's me. Another thing another story about Charlie. So, back in those days, I was a pilot, and I used to fly out of the College Park Airport. I don't know if it's still in business, but is it? Okay. Well, back in those days, and maybe now today, they had Piper Cub airplane. The Piper Cub airplane, if you're not familiar with it, is canvas, yellow canvas. The third wheel is in the back, which makes it challenging to land. And the propeller was made of wood. And to run it, I would be in the pilot seat, and I would say contact, and then somebody would literally have to pull the propeller down by hand. And I'm telling you this story because I took Charlie for a flight in a Piper Cub. And that was, it was just I was so glad to be able to give something back, if you will. Just a wonderful time. The Misners have, the family still has, a summer home in South Bristol, Maine. And I visited Charlie and Susanna and Francis there several times over the years. I'm sorry, I'm on the faculty of the University of Maine. So that's the connection with Maine there. And can you put the
photo up? And it'll take me a moment to share it with the others. Here we go. Okay.
Thank you. There we are at their summer home, and you can see it's theirs because of the little sign. But anyways, it was absolutely delightful to stay connected with Charlie over the years. Then when I heard we have a summer home in central New York. So when I heard he died, I drove down from central New York to the funeral and helped carry his coffin into the church. And then I, at the sort of reception afterwards, got to meet his grandkids for the first time. And they're just wonderful and, active and intelligent, and they're on their way, so to speak. So that was a wonderful opportunity as well. I went on to finish my degree from 1975 to 1978 in Cardiff, Wales. I was Bernie Schutz's first graduate student, and that was a very interesting experience too. And I'd like to end, and make sure I said everything I wanted to here. I'd like to end with a story about my office mate here at the University of Maryland back in those days. It was Jim Eisenberg. And Jim was just a wonderful guy, and he was a runner, a serious world-class runner. Anyways, back in those days, in the physics building, they were, shall we say, cramped for space for the graduate students. So there was a room full of graduate student desks and so on, but they didn't have enough for all of us. So what they did was they took, at the very end of the second floor, they took the bathroom. The bathroom had two rooms in it, the regular bathroom, and then a shower room. And they put a door between them. And they also put a door from the shower room into the graduate student offices. With me so far on this? Okay. And Jim Eisenberg and I were put into the shower room. I'm not making this up. And we named it, and they have a plaque, and I have a picture somewhere, but I didn't bring it. But we named it the Lavatory for Theoretical Physics. Thank you.
Yeah.
I first met Charlie, who at that point I very carefully referred to as Professor Misner, in the summer of 1973, and at his family's summer residence in South Bristol, Maine. I had been working with Professor Wheeler, my undergraduate advisor, at his nearby summer residence in High Island. Professor Wheeler and I were talking about working on Marx's principle. I thought when I visited Charlie, I would tell him about that. But I quickly found out that he didn't care about Marx's principle. Not a big interest for him at all. Instead, Charlie took me out sailing, and he spent most of the time on the boat telling me how important it was to develop numerical relativity so that it could accurately model black hole collisions, as Saul was talking about, and the resulting gravitational radiation. He told me some very interesting ideas about adding parabolic terms to the elliptic constraint equation, so you didn't have to keep solving them at every time step. A couple months later, I started graduate school at Maryland during the 1970s. Charlie, together with Dina Brill, had developed one of the premier gravitational physics centers in the country, if not in the world. And included with Charlie and Dina was Bob Gowdy, a wonderful line of postdocs, as well as a very vibrant set of graduate students, many of them who will be talking today. One of the things I remember very clearly from the first and second year was Charlie's address to the grad students, saying that none of them should go into gravitational physics because there are way too many people and no jobs at all. I didn't follow that advice. The second year of grad school, I spent lots and lots of time trying to implement some of Charlie's great ideas for numerical relativity. Unfortunately, I did a very stupid thing. I tried to implement those ideas on the existing numerical code developed by Ken Epley, who at that time was a postdoc at Maryland. At that time, coding was done using punch card. Just about every day, I'd put together some Fortran code on punch cards, and after that, I bring them up the hill to the computer center, and I wait to see what happened. And not surprisingly, each morning I went back to the computer center. I got a whole bunch of a huge stack of paper, lots and lots of trees, which said that I'd made some stupid error, and my temperament at that time didn't fit at all. Fortunately, near the end of my second year, I spoke with Charlie again, and we agreed I should try something different. He got me to think about the Bolitsky-Kolotnikov Lifshitz ideas, which were referred to a little bit before. And the idea was to study the gravitational fields near the Big Bang. And this involved quite a bit of Charlie's mixed master development. It turns out it's exceptionally difficult to implement. Even today, the full idea has not been really mathematically developed very well, but there's a somewhat simplified version of this that we call asymptotically velocity term dominated, which I've worked with Vince Moncrief and others, and this has worked very well. I continue to work on this even now. There are two other very important pieces of advice which Charlie gave me back then. One was to forget about being an astronaut, and I was sort of obsessed with that, but reluctantly, with his advice, I forgot about doing that. And the second very good piece of advice he said is to focus on finding a job in the mathematics department. As you've heard before, Charlie was, of course, a wonderful physicist, but also a very accomplished mathematician. So that worked out very well. And so I stayed in touch with Charlie over the years, somewhat intimately, especially when my wife got a job in DC in 2014. But I stayed somewhat in touch, especially after that, and so and we've talked about this BKL stuff in the past. But anyhow, I should mention also that I had a bad accident about 6 years, as you may guess from my pretty poor voice. But he sent me a very nice email after that, asking how I was doing, and I'm very I will miss Charlie very much. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
It's so nice to see some of these students that I used to be classmates with and worked with. As a graduate student, I was very fortunate to become a graduate student at University of Maryland in the early 70s. And so nice to see Neil and Jim. I also went up in that plane once with Neil. And I remember also visiting Charlie's place in Maine. I was very fortunate to be asked by Charlie Misner to help him when they were finishing writing Misner Thorne Wheeler. He asked me to check the equations for those chapters that were his responsibility. So I went through this very, very carefully, making sure all the indices were correct and so forth. So I've learned a lot about Misner Thorne Wheeler, and I've been very affected by many things that Charlie has done. He was a pioneer in developing and applying differential geometry to modern physics problems, especially for GR, in using differential forms, in the Hamiltonian formalism, in investigating energy, and all of these have affected my work. And but especially the textbook, Misner Thorne Wheeler. I have taught from that book many, many times in Edmonton, in Taiwan, and in Beijing. And I cannot think of, I was so lucky to have Charlie as an advisor. He really was most suitable for me and a great inspiration to me.
I wish I could be there, but I'm going to be climbing a volcano tomorrow. So anyway, so what I wanted to say, well, I was actually, what I thought up until a month ago when Ted wrote me was I was Charlie's last PhD student. But the thing is that just a little bit like a Far Side cartoon, instead of being the last of the Mohicans, I found out I was the next to the last of the Mohicans, which at least reassures me that I didn't destroy Charlie's interest in having graduate students beyond myself. What I wanted to say a few words about, obviously everybody is speaking about what Charlie did as a scientist, the influence of his ideas and work. I think Baylock kind of started to touch on the aspects of who he was as a scientist, as opposed to what he did as a scientist, and how influential that was, and certainly in my case. I mean, so how did I end up with Charlie? Basically, when I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a theoretical astrophysicist, which, coming from a very small industrial town in the north of England, caused great amusement to my mother's family. And also we had in that small town, thanks to the beneficence of Andrew Carnegie, a public library that happened to have a book. It was basically Dirac's book on general relativity. So I read that and I decided, oh, I want to do general relativity, I want to do black holes. I went to Oxford to do physics, and there I found MTW. And sometimes the idea of destiny is that, you know, gives us a useful narrative in our life, right? We don't, just like teleology and evolution, we don't believe in it, but it kind of looks like it's there. So the same with destiny. So I kind of figured, okay, well, you know, there's this guy Misner, there's this wonderful book, there's this thing that I want to get into, black holes, etc., etc. So how do I put them together? Well, you know, I applied to the University of Maryland. I went there. That was like 1981. And getting there, well, basically quantum field theory and curved space-time, the great synthesis between thermodynamics, gravity, quantum theory was in its heyday. Basically, quantum field theory in the early universe, inflation was just starting to take off. And as everybody's emphasizing, right, or Jim just said, at that time for me too, it felt like it was the place to be, a real intellectual center. Everyone was busy, everyone was excited, etc. To put it in only those terms, though, would kind of miss to me what was the most important thing that I took away from Maryland, and it really is to do with the word Baylock used, and I think we all feel it. It's the word family, right? It felt like a family. And just like with many families, you only really appreciate its qualities looking back, and often only looking from outside. In that sense, what was the family like? Well, Baylock, for me, was my protective big brother. Dieter was the wise and witty uncle. Ted, arriving later on, was the out-of-town smart cousin who you'd never met before. There was a group of really talented students just at the time of Jim's and Neil's group. My great friend Denjo O'Connor, Terry Honan there, Salman, Ron Regat, and I can think of those as the squabbling siblings, right? They were always arguing about everything and always excited about everything. But as Baylock said, Charlie was the father figure, right? In one sense, he was kind of a bit remote, but that was only because of his shyness and his humility, rather than he was remote by being called. And he was somebody who you looked to and admired tremendously. So why did I admire Charlie so much? I think there's two things that we can think of them as representing family values, right? One, I think of as intellectual integrity. So what does that mean? It was the idea that what we were doing wasn't a job, it was a vocation, right? So in other words, it had to be appreciated and taken very, very seriously. Another was not so much intellectual rigor, but intellectual depth. That the primary purpose of what we were doing was of the utmost importance, right? To understand at the deepest level nature, and it wasn't just transactional. Get a doctorate, publish a paper, get a faculty position, and I think those two values, I hope, inspired by Charlie, I've carried in the rest of my career as it's gone on. The other aspect of family that I remember, and I think is significant, is, let's call it the genealogical one. That Charlie, in that sense, was the father figure, but there was also grandfather and great-grandfather figures that we're all aware of. John Wheeler himself, and through back to Bohr, and those family roots, precisely that, their roots. The things that both can nourish you and support you. So, I think somebody like Neil has vignettes that are much more interesting than mine, going up in the aircraft with Charlie, etc., etc. But it's interesting to know, why does something stick in your head, right? So there's just a couple that I will end with, and one of them was, we know, all of us, the quality of Charlie's mind, and that was always on show at our seminars. But thinking of, Stan Days has been mentioned several times. I remember one seminar where Stan came, unfortunately 40 years on. I can't remember the particular subject, but what I do remember clearly is that Charlie made an observation, and then that observation started to be elaborated, and it got elaborated by him just getting up at the blackboard. And then there was a Charlie tour de force, while Stan just stood to one side with a kind of look of interested surprise and admiration at the same time, while Charlie just let loose. And I think the fact that it is stuck in my mind after more than 40 years just reflects the impact it had on me, from the point of view of just sheer admiration of the mind, the first-class mind, that Charlie had, and seeing it all its pomp, as it were. The other anecdote, and for some reason, I'm not sure why this sticks out in the same sense as the first one, but here it is. It's back to this genealogical thing. It was, I don't know whether it was the only time when John Wheeler came to visit, but I remember there was a reception. We were all gathered round, and let's call it all the grandkids, all the squabbling grandkids were trying to get his attention of this, their eminent grandfather. And as usual, I was very excited, very enthusiastic, and talking rapidly about my work. And I was speaking about quantum fluctuations and statistical fluctuations and thermodynamic fluctuations and the relation between these fluctuations. And I think John, who was probably a bit hard of hearing at that time, was looking more and more puzzled, and looked over to Charlie, and I think to Baylock at the same time. What the hell was this word that he was going on about? Was it like from, you know, fluxions from Principia Mathematica or something like that? So it was to explain that no, what he was talking about was the word fluctuations. That was kind of an aspect of, let's call it, you might say multilingual, that although there was a lot of English speakers, we all had very, very strange English accents. So I'm, you know, sorry that I'm not there. The thing that makes me really sorry, Baylock and Ted, is that, you know, I got to see you two guys, and I, you know, when I was there last time, and I didn't get to see Charlie. That's somewhat upsetting. I hope, Dieter, you know, I remember you so fondly too, that I can make some trip up there and make sure I see you at some point in the future. But the thing that I do have is just, you know, what Charlie gave me, these family values, this appreciation of the importance of doing science properly, with great integrity and with great depth, and that's the inheritance that, you know, I'll carry with me, and I have been carrying with me in my academic life, and I'll carry it for the rest of my academic life. And thank you, and a big hug to everybody there from the Medal and GR family.
Thank you very much, Steve. Take care.